November 26th, the memory of our Holy Father Alipius the Stylite. Our Holy Father Alypius was born in the city of Adrianople in the province of Paphlagonia during the reign of Heraclius. During her pregnancy, his mother had a vision of a lamb bearing in place of horns 2 lighted candles foretelling the divine graces with which the servant of God would be filled. When he was only 3, his father died, and his mother placed him in the care of Bishop Theodore to study sacred literature and to be brought up for the service of the Church. The child's remarkable ability as well as his great piety commended him to the bishop's successor, also called Theodore, who, urged by all the faithful, made him steward of the Church and ordained him deacon when he reached the canonical age. He fulfilled this double office admirably, but he longed to follow the straight and narrow path of the eremitic life, for his soul was wounded with the love of Christ. Obeying at last the voice of his conscience, he gave away his goods to the poor, and told his pious mother of his intention to leave for the Holy Land and to embrace the monastic life. Far from imposing this plan in order to keep him near her, the holy woman threw herself weeping into his arms, praised God for his courageous resolution, and gave him her blessing. Taking to the road in secret lest the bishop and the people of the city hold him back, he had got as far as Euphemia, when the bishop caught up with him on the feast of St. Theodore a few days later, and insisted on his returning home. Forced back to the world, the servant of God was consoled by a vision that revealed to him the mystical presence, even there in his native city, of the holy places of Bethlehem, Nazareth, Jerusalem, and Golgotha, where God would have him engaged in the blessed contests of the ascetic life. He began looking for a remote spot to live in, and he was brought by a vision to a place with a spring of water, on an arid mountain to the south of Adrianople. And here he set about dedicating a chapel and then building a cell. But the bishop wanted Alypius near at hand to serve in the world to which he was now a stranger, so he blocked up the spring to oblige him to come down to the plain where he would be more accessible. Nothing daunted, the saint fixed on a demon-haunted spot, full of old tombs and pagan sanctuaries that everyone kept well away from. His relatives tried in vain to dissuade him from climbing up one of the derelict monuments, on which was a pillar surmounted by the statue of a fabulous animal, half bull, half lion. "Here is my resting place," he exclaimed, and went back to the town to fetch a cross and a crowbar. He dislodged the statue and threw it to the ground, setting up the life-giving cross in its place, determined henceforth to rout the demons in their own lair. Having business that required his attending on the emperor, the bishop constrained Alypius to accompany him to court. When they reached Chalcedon, the saint hid in the oratory of St. Vasa by the sea, and was asleep when the bishop embarked for Constantinople. St. Euphemia, the patroness of Chalcedon, appeared to him as he slept, and she told him to go home, assuring him of her protection. On returning to his hermitage, Alypius built a chapel dedicated to St. Euphemia at a place miraculously pointed out to him in a vision. As he possessed nothing himself, some of his friends provided everything necessary for building the chapel, and they all set about the work of construction. Despite his desire to settle on the pillar, Alypius followed the advice of the elders with due regard for their discernment, and he withdrew to a narrow cell not far from the chapel in order to give himself ardently to the purification of his soul by fasting, vigil, and prayer. He was 30 years old at the time and spent 2 years in this cell waging relentless war against the demons. Their evil suggestions could not shake him, and he drove them off by the sign of the cross and the fire-bearing words of the Holy Scripture. So fast did the word spread of the servant of God that much as he wished to persist in his holy work without distraction, he was under the necessity of welcoming many of the faithful who came to receive his blessing. Gentle, easy to speak to, attentive to all alike, young and old, rich and poor, he would have no one leave him except filled with spiritual joy. But becoming aware that such involvement was harmful to his soul, and having by then sufficient skill in the ascetic art, he decided to make his abode on top of the pillar, protected from the weather by a small, rough wooden roof. Since there was not room enough on the pillar to lie down or to sit, Alypius was always on his feet like a living column, year in, year out exposed to the elements, struggling against heat and cold, wind and rain. Whereas the sufferings of the martyrs lasted for a little while, St. Alypius offered himself to this daily martyrdom for 53 years, doing violence to nature each day in order to gain everlasting life. Set in the sight of all like a lamp on its stand, the saint gave light to all by his virtues. He had overcome self-love and self-conceit and offered himself like the apostles as a spectacle to the world, to angels and to men for love of Christ. Crowds of people made haste to the pillar, asking for the Stylite's intercession. Some even wanted to settle there as his disciples. The first of these was Euphemia, a high-born lady soon joined by another, Eubula, who became abbess of the convent, established before long at one side of the pillar. The mother of St. Alypius, who had overcome the weakness of her nature and her maternal affection in order to follow her son and to assist him in accomplishing his feats of piety, also joined the community, but she would not receive the habit despite the saint's desire. Such was her devotion that in her duty of distributing alms she would give away to the poor even what was needed for the subsistence of the nuns. Some time later, Alypius founded a monastery on the other side of the pillar for the men who wanted to stay by him. It was wonderful to hear the choir of virgins and that of the monks chanting the praises of God responsively 7 times a day, and to behold the saint, that earthly angel and heavenly man, standing between the two, joining his voice to theirs and raising his hands to the triune God in intercession for the salvation of the world. After 53 years of such ascetic contest, paralysis seized half his body and his feet gave out. He could now only lie on one side, all but immobile, for the remaining 14 years of his earthly life. Afflicted at the same time with a painful ulcer, he blessed the name of the Lord like righteous Job. When he gave up his soul to God at last, aged 99, the people hastened to venerate his body, and a possessed man was healed in its presence.
Ave